Please, Professor Miedema, come forward and tell us more about the necessity of open science.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see me and hear me? I think so. I decided not to use the PowerPoint and distract you too much, but I will give a short introduction, say why open science is extremely, say, spot on for this animal research, say, conference and also activity, because it's also an activity and an action. And that has already been, introduced by Monique Janssen, namely, open science is all about how can we do science better and how can we do also the right science in the right way. So it's about an agenda setting, but it's also about how are we doing, how are we going about, and of course, how are we dealing with animal experimentation? And this is you could think in some respects peripheral to open science, but not in our mind. In our mind, open science came from the field of responsible research and innovation. And responsible research and innovation is all about being aware and creating awareness and discussing and being critical about what type of research are we doing, for whom, with whom, are we engaged? Do we realize that science is for the better society? And of course, the other thing is, okay, if you have realized that this is the case and that we all are in that game and that we are say open to feedback about our agenda, but also open about feedback of how do you do a research, then of course dealing with animal experimentation is, say, one of the highest priorities. Of course, coming from the clinical field, and also Jeroen Geurts, who's one of the next speakers, also coming from the clinical field, in say doing clinical trials, doing say phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and 4 trials in humans, that has already had an enormous amount of say attention, and there is a lot of say regulations and guidance has been say implemented already, but in some respects you could say animal research experimentation with animals has been slow in that respect. And you can see, and I see it already on the slide behind Monique, you see Arrive and you see other say action groups and say, yeah, thank you very much, and all other actions, international actions to improve say animal experimentation. And this has been there for a long time already. And now with the Open Science Program and also with responsible research and innovation, you see that these say actions and actions movements have gotten say more traction. And I think that is very good. So therefore, say being the chair of the Open Science Program in Utrecht and being an advocate for open science also in Coalition S and in Europe, but also say in the wider context, the Open Science Program really is also looking at, say, improving the quality and also the performance of animal experimentation. And to give you an example, that is really something that is that should now be on the top of our mind. Why? Well, I have to confess, I did. How much time do we have, Monique?
Oh, you have 20 minutes. So
oh my God! Yeah. So yeah. I will take 10 of them. So I will confess. I did when I was a student and a PhD, and also before I started my PhD, I was working at the RIVM, the National Center of Public Health in Beeldhoven. But then before that, in Groningen, I was heavily involved in doing experimentations with rats and mice, and huge numbers of mice, and also very complicated and very invasive experimentation with rats in the early days in Groningen. And I can remember that in those days, also in my vaccination experiments in the RIVM, that was in 79 and 80. That's a long time ago, more than 40 years ago. I'm sorry, I'm already old. But we used literally thousands of mice divided in, controls, vaccine 1, vaccine 2, etc., boosters, etc. And these were huge experiments. And were they double-blinded? Did I know which group the mice were that I was killing to measure the antibody responses? No, there was no blinding. There was no pre-registered protocol. Everything was just open. This was just how it was done. Nobody was teaching me how to do it. We were just evaluating the experiment group 1, group 2, antibody responses, and compared them and did some not very sophisticated statistics. And I can confess this because at that time, in 40 years ago, this was probably like everybody was doing those experiments. Nobody was sort of aware of couldn't there be bias, because of course we wanted to have the vaccine a wonderful, say, immune response and much better than in the control group, etc., etc. So we had a very strong idea of what we were testing, and our hypothesis was clear. So were we blinded? Was there some control for that type of, say, bias? No, not at all. And even later, when I did that type of experiments later on, also in Amsterdam, this was still the case. Now people realize, and this is of course ARRIVE, and there are many other, say, movements, we have to be very, 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 say, aware of bias. Are the experiments carefully designed? Do you really need that large number of mice? Do you need that type of rats or even rabbits or pigs? You name it. I never worked with something different from mice, rats, and rabbits myself, but there are people experimenting with pigs, as you know, but also on goats. So this is now something that has been brought to the forefront, and people have been, say, discussing at meetings, increasingly at meetings, but also publishing in Nature and Science, in top journals, that we should be more critical and that we should, say, pay attention. And ARRIVE, for instance, not many people know, that is something that some of the major journals have been, say, subscribing to and supporting, that if you publish in that journal, you should, say, be, say, compliant with the rules of ARRIVE. You will hear in the rest of the program what that means. And that means really, say, good clinical practice, in fact, in your animal experimentation. But there are more experts in the room, like my colleague, Judith de Haan. She is also one of the initiative takers of pre-registration in animal studies. And so you will hear probably also from her. But definitely, this is where we have to go. So I realized what I did when I was, say, starting my scientific career. I realized where we are now, and also very much the case. And this is probably also what Jeroen is going to say. People are watching. People are not only in politics, but also the public at large. People are paying attention. So how do scientists deal with animal experimentation? And of course, that you could still argue that some of that experimentation is extremely important because of public health, because of getting a vaccine tested, etc., and getting a vaccine approved. That's fine, but it should all be very, say, well thought through, discussed, and thoroughly, say, argued. And also, the decision should be made, say, very clearly based on that type of, say, evidence. Therefore, I think open science takes this on and takes also animal experimentation on, like clinical studies. It's extremely important to spending. And now the final, say, argument I want to make with you, people could argue, yeah, okay, if I spend more time on designing my experiments, if I take more time on doing experiments in a different way, and most of the times it takes more time, it's more costly. Will I get, say, recognition and reward for that? Will that be understood by my department head, by the dean, and that I take more time to do these experiments more carefully? It takes more time, it's more time consuming, so I will publish less, but I will publish better. So I will improve, I will spend a lot of time on investment in quality and not in quantity of my research. And this is, of course, where also open science has been arguing this type of practices should also be taken into account and be appreciated in our recognition and reward system. And I hope that also some of the other speakers will relate to that. That is very important, because if people only count your articles, then of course, spending time on doing your experiments better and with higher quality may not all of the times be, say, taken into account. And this is, of course, problematic. So we have to recognize and reward people for doing this type of experiments. For instance, spending time now, this afternoon, discussing and say, supporting the awareness of this type of, say, animal studies and animal research, also for their PhDs, for their PIs, and for their postdocs. So I'm strongly supporting this symposium and I congratulate you, Monique, and your colleagues for organizing it. And I hope that people will take the message home, and not only listening today and this afternoon, but take this message to to their laboratories, to their groups, to their, say, lab meetings, and say, I was Tuesday afternoon, I was at this meeting where Jeroen Geurts, you know, the director of Son and Wee, gave a talk, and we have to discuss how are we doing our animal research, and how are we doing our animal experimentation? Are we compliant with ARRIVE and that type of stuff? So take it home, discuss with your PIs and with your professors, because that's what Monique wants. This is not only for the believers, this is something to spread the news and to improve the quality of our research. Monique, Jeroen, I leave you here. And I hope that you have a nice, interesting meeting with the rest of the people, and you have a major supporter, and also somebody who has already confessed to be guilty of not being, say, compliant with what we now think is the standard of care of clinical care in animal research, as when I was a youngster in Groningen and in RIVM. And I leave you here. Thank you very much.